G'day from Australia. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm broadcasting. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. My name is Ashley Davis. Welcome to my coding live stream. I'm continuing the development of my Kanban board extension for Visual Studio Code. In the last session I did some planning and started to implement properly sending data from the VS Code extension to the Kanban board that's rendered in the web view. Today I'm going to continue that plan and I'm going to implement editing of the Kanban board and sending the Kanban board data back to the extension to save it back to the markdown file. You know, we're almost finished the core functionality of this Visual Studio Code extension, so it's pretty exciting. As I'm working, I'm going to do my best to explain what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is AshleyDavis75. Now, if you want to get the code for this yourself, you can go to my GitHub page. That's Ashley Davis on GitHub. The GitHub repo is Taskboard VS Code extension. Please clone this or fork it and clone it if you want to contribute. There's some instructions here for getting started. If you've been watching this live stream from the start, you'll have seen many times, you know, how to clone this and how to get this project up and running. If you do want to catch up with what's happened previously, go to my YouTube page. That's the Data Wrangler on YouTube. If you go to videos, actually if you go to playlists, there's a heap of good stuff in videos here, stuff that I've recorded. But under playlists, if you choose the Taskboard playlist, that will give you all the previous live streams. Actually, I think I've forgotten to add one because I think live stream number 9 should be there as well. Let's have a look and just see if that's here. Yeah, so I've forgotten to add live stream 9 to the playlist. I'll have to come back and do that soon. Today is the 10th session of this live stream, so it's been going for a while now. But we are getting close to getting something like being complete for this. Now, I'm in my working for directory here. Just clear the screen. I cloned this copy a couple of sessions ago and started working with it. Often what I do to jump back into a project after I've left it for a while, and I've left this one basically for almost a week. I did do a little bit of work on this between live streams, and I'll show you what I did in a moment. But usually what I do when I'm jumping back into a project is just immediately run the tests. So I'm running the tests under jest here, running them through the npm test script that's defined in package.json. So there's a bunch of tests there. They're all passing. So I'm starting off from a suite of passing tests here, which is a good place to start from. And I'm just going to open Visual Studio Code on this directory. You can type in Windows at least, you can type in code dot to get to that. So in the last session we made this plan about, you know, how we get to sort of the end product. I pretty much got through the first part of that, which is basically whenever the current selected markdown document changes in Visual Studio Code, we then pass the markdown to an abstract syntax tree. That's a data structure in memory that represents the markdown file. We convert the AST to board data, Kanban board data. So that's something that we can pass across to the web view. So that's what we're doing here, send the board data to the web view. And then we're going to render that using React Trello, which is a really great React component that's available on NPM. That allows you to render like a Kanban board that looks exactly like Trello. Now, in the web view side of things, we did half of it as well. We received the new board data and we applied that board data to the Kanban board. Today, we're going to do the other half of this, or at least make a start on it, which is whenever updates are received from, down here, we'll start with. So basically in the web view, we're waiting for the Kanban board to give us an event saying something's been edited, like a lane or a task has been changed or something like that, or a task has been moved around within the board. And then we're going to send those editing events back to the extension. And then what the extension is going to do is this second half of the plan here, which is parse the update, make the necessary changes to the abstract syntax tree, and then serialize the abstract syntax tree back to the markdown file. And so we're replacing the content of the markdown file with that new markdown that's been generated. Now, because we're holding an abstract syntax tree in memory, and we're just making edits to that, we're sort of doing surgery on an AST, we're not losing any data. So all the data that came in from the markdown file is going to be there. Because if we just naively, serialize this, or is it the other way around? If we naively deserialize this markdown into Kanban board data and then deserialize it directly back without going through an abstract syntax tree, if we do that, we run the risk of losing user data, because the Kanban board data format is more restrictive than Markdown. So things will get lost when we're going through this translation. And keeping the AST in memory and doing changes to that and then serializing the AST back to Markdown means we don't lose any user data that wouldn't otherwise fit in the Kanban board. Now, before let's have a bit of a review of what happened last week and where we got to. We left it with a bit of a cliffhanger. So I'm just in SourceTree here. In the last session we left it. There was something. I felt like there was something wrong with the function that converts the Markdown AST to Kanban board data, because it wasn't returning a proper board from my data. And I figured out what the problem was. But before we look at that, let's just review last week's changes. So I've added to package.json. So we're just in SourceTree here, looking at the differences that have been staged already. I've installed, various packages here: remark parse, remark stringify, and unified. That's for parse or serializing and deserializing Markdown files. And then what we did in the web view, in the React application, where instead of bringing or doing the conversion from the Markdown to board data within, I need to actually delete this code here. I shouldn't have just commented out. So what we're doing here, instead of converting the board data directly in the web view, is that we're now doing that conversion in the extension. It makes a lot more sense to me to do that there. And we're passing that through, and we're just passing setting the board data directly into the state here. And then we're using that board data to render React Trello from. We'll have a look at that in a bit more detail soon. And then in the extension code itself, this is where we're doing our setup for Markdown. So we've got a function here that can convert from Markdown to an AST. We've got a function here that can convert from the AST back to Markdown. Now there's just a few little refactor renames here, nothing too exciting. A bit of error checking here in case there's no document loaded. Then what we're doing down here, we're posting the message over to the web view, and this is where we're basically taking the Markdown, we're converting that to an AST, and then we're converting the AST to board data, and then we're sending the board data through to the web view. Now, the one thing I'd missed, so this is what I did in between live streams, this changes here, is this Markdown object that's being passed through and being parsed was actually the global Markdown object. It wasn't actually the Markdown text. So I had to, it's a bit funny that this is actually an issue, because TypeScript, you would think, should kind of prevent this kind of thing. But maybe this function isn't typed very well, so maybe it didn't pick up the issue. Anyway, so to fix it, I pull the text out of the current active document to a Markdown variable. I'm just printing that just to make sure that was okay. Just debug printing it there. And then that's what's being parsed now. So that actually works. And that actually gives us a board data that we can then pass through to the web view and put in the Kanban board. And that's actually working now. So let's just stage that. I just want to get rid of some code that I had commented out previously. Where was that? That might have been in the React application. There it is there. So, sometimes I comment code out just because I want to see it again later. But I don't like, and sometimes I do, I make all these rules and I often have to break them anyway. But I like to just delete code instead of commenting out, right? Where I can, where it makes sense to do that. I don't want to have all that commented out code confusing things in my commit. So what I'm actually going to commit is that code being removed. So what am I doing here? I'll commit my plan, that's okay. What am I doing? So I'm now converting the markdown to AST and then board data in the extension and passing the board data through to the web view. Okay, so I've just committed that and pushed it. I committed it using source tree. I'm pushing it using the command line. So that is the code from last week's session. That is just going live on the repo now. If you want to have a look at that in more detail. So what's the next thing on my agenda? So I'm in the web view now. I want to wait for various editing events, and I want to send those editing events back to the extension. I'm actually going to, for this, I'm actually going to open the web view subdirectory in its own Visual Studio Code instance. So I'll just change directory to that. Open VS Code from that. Just makes sense to keep them separate, and you can do Control-Shift-B to build it. So that's going to actually build it in Visual Studio Code here. It'll show me any errors that pop up down there, but I'm not really that interested in that at the moment. So I've got what I've got here. Now there's a few different events I want to handle on React Trello. In fact, let's open the React Trello web page. Just so I can look at the API documentation for this. It's always good to have that open. I actually think I need to upgrade this. I actually think I need to upgrade to the latest version of this React Trello, because it's got a few, I think it's got a new event handler that I'm going to need. But we probably won't get to that today anyway. So here's all the different callbacks and handlers that I can use on this. I'm just going to check the one that I'm using here already, data change, and just remind myself of what this actually does. On data change, so called every time the data changes due to user interaction or event bus. So there's a few other ones here, like on card add, that might be useful. On card delete, on lane add, on lane delete, on lane update. What I really want is on card update, but that's the one they don't seem to have. I thought they would have added that by now. I was watching an issue on the GitHub repo for this, and I'm sure they did implement that, but maybe they just haven't added it to the documentation yet. So, but like I said, I'm probably not going to need that today. On data change is pretty useless to me. I think what on data change does is just give me the entire Kanban board data back, which I think can be useful just for debugging, right? So let's just get rid of some of this. So I'm just going to get rid of that later, but for now I'm just going to do a console.log to show me what's coming through this event. This is a great way to see what's happening. I already know that this event really isn't the one I'm looking for, right at the moment, but it's going to be interesting just to have a look at that anyway. I think what I really want is things like on lane update. Basically I want to be able to separate out all the different kinds of editing that can be done, because I don't want to have to, send the whole board, the whole edited board back to the extension. I only want to send just the little updates, just the little delta changes that have changed, and then poke them into the AST. I will use on lane update. I'm just going to start with on lane update. So I'm going to plug that in here. So this is the way you handle an event on a React component. You plug it in through the props. Now the parameters to this are lane ID, and so I'm just looking at this here just to see what parameters are. Now another way you could do this is if the documentation wasn't very good. I'm in TypeScript here. I could say args are I'm expecting multiple args of any type. And then you could do, a console log of the args like that. That's an interesting way. That's a cool little way to see like what all the arguments to any given function are. So it's almost like you're creating your own documentation there. But you know, the documentation here is reasonable. It's lane ID and data, so you can even just copy those across directly, like that. So let's log this data. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm literally just going to run this and see what I get here. I'm not going to make any assumptions. Okay, so I'm going to run this. I can actually run this if I comment this out, this data here. See how I've got a little comment there that says comment this out to use test data instead. If I comment that out, I can actually run this as a standalone React app. Fingers crossed it still works. And I just have to remind myself how to run it. I think it's, I'm not sure if this is using the same conventions that I would normally use. Oh, it is, cool. So what I want is this start dev command. So always, if you can't remember how to run a Node.js application, go and have a look at the package.json, have a look at the scripts. Usually it's npm start, but usually that's to run it in production. This is actually building it, so building it for development, which doesn't make sense. I didn't start this project, by the way. I'm building on top of someone else's project here, which is why it doesn't completely conform to my own sort of standards and conventions. I am going to change it later. I am going to do a bit of refactoring on it later. But for now, I know what I need to do. I'm going to run this npm start, npm run start dev. So that's going to run that little script from package.json. It's running the Webpack dev server, and it's going to open the web page for me. And fingers crossed, I will see in a moment. It takes Webpack like a few moments to get started. Cool. So I've got some test data. This is a little bit quicker. This is slightly quicker than starting the Visual Studio Code extension, which has to build this Webpack, build this React application using Webpack. Then it has to build the code for the extension itself. Then it has to run a new instance of Visual Studio Code. I haven't figured out, I did do a bit of research, but I haven't figured out how to get live reload working for a Visual Studio Code extension yet. That would be great to have the extension running and to be testing it, to be able to update code and have that kind of live update, like hot reload. I really want that to be working. That's what developers really need to be productive, is live reload. But you know, in between streams, I didn't find any way of doing that yet. If you do know how to do that, if you've done this kind of thing before and you do know how to do that, please reach out to me on Twitter, AshleyDavis75 on Twitter, and tell me, because I really need to know. Anyway, what I'm doing here is I'm testing that online update event. I think I'll just change the name of this. That'll be a good start. Plan tasks 1. Cool. So you can see here that we've had an on data change. You know, that's giving you all the lanes. That's giving you all the data. So that's a big array of things. That's why I don't want to have to transmit the full load of data back and like integrate that. That would be like a lot of extra work and not very good for the performance of this extension. But here's the data event anyway. Here's the online update event. The lane ID is called planned, and the data is just the title. So I think I've got something I can work with here. I'm going to send this. I'm going to send the lane ID and this data. I'm going to send that back to the extension for the update to occur. So let's figure out how that happens. Now I already had some code here. This interactor thing, interactor update document. Now I can make something like that that's going to be like, you know, send edit or something like that. Let's have a look. In fact, I'm just going to do Control-Shift-F and just search my whole code repository here for update document. I'll put on match case. There's a whole bunch of hits there. I'm not interested in anything in the dist directory though. So let's just exclude stuff that's in the dist directory. I'll just zoom in a little bit here. So all I'm left with is one file. Oh, and the interactor. So that's what I just commented out there. This is the kind of the test mode version of the interactor. So it's got all these functions like stubbed out. and they don't do anything. I'm gonna have a function called send edit, and what's it gonna send? Let's just say it's sending a payload. I know it's going to be lane ID and title in this case, but for editing other things, I don't know how much data I'm going to have to send. So let's just log that here. So that's what we're going to see when we run this in the browser. That's what we're going to see. We're missing comma. There we go. Now the other place we're going to implement this is actually the proper implementation in the VS Code implementation of the interactor. This code is slightly not to my taste. I am going to do updates to this code, refactor it, restyle it a bit later. At the moment, in the interest of speed and getting through this, I'm not going to. So I'm just going to copy this VS Code. Where are we? I'm going to copy this VS Code message here. So this is the way that we're sending a message from the web view, which is running, I guess, in a separate process, or at least a separate browser instance or something like that. But this is going to send a message back to VS Code, so it's going to send the edit back. Let's just say it's send edit. I should come up with a better name for that. Anyway, so we're going to send through the payload. That's all good. Now, when we go back to index.ts, I'm just going to send that from here. So on the interactor, I'm going to call the send edit function, and the payload is going to be lane ID, and then data, I guess. Just directly passing through those arguments in an object. And if I go back to where I'm running this here, you can see that it should have reloaded. I'm using the DevPack web server. I'm just gonna do a refresh to be sure. Oh, that's right. So I'm going to edit task name, and here's our console log. It hasn't. What we can do is we can actually just JSON stringify that so that we can see it. So I'll just do a JSON stringify, if I could spell a JSON properly. Is that all I need? So that's refreshed. Let's edit that again. Yep, cool. So we've got our send edit, and we've got our data that's going to be sent. So that's the first part of what I'm doing here, and all the edits that I'm going to be implementing in this Kanban board are going to follow a similar sort of theme here, but I'm just going to get one through. That might be all I get time to do today. I'm just going to get one of these through today, and then probably in another session or in between live streams even, I'll get other things working, like the edits for dragging these things, the edits for dragging boards around, columns or lanes around, and being able to edit the cards themselves as well. So let's get out of this. Let's get back to the extension. So I'm just going to kill my Webpack dev server there. I'll go back to the Visual Studio instance here for the extension. Now what I want to do is I need to be able to handle that send edit message that's coming back through. So we're up to this part now. Update received from the web view. So we've got to find a way to get the update basically. Now my clue, when I'm trying to find code, especially in this code that, there's not much code here, but to be honest, I don't remember how it all works all the time. I mean, after I've been working on this for months, right? Probably about 4 months now, and I only work on it, half an hour a week, sometimes a little bit more. When you've been working on code for more than a couple of weeks, especially when you're juggling multiple projects, right? It's really easy to forget how code works. especially when it's not your own code base, when you're building on the top of someone else's code base. So I have a lot of tricks I use to kind of navigate code and find out what I'm looking for. What I was looking for this time is this update document command, and I found it just by scrolling through this code file. It's not a big code file, so it was easy to find. But if this was a bigger project, if this was a bigger code file, what I'd do is I'd actually search for that. So Control-Shift-F, and I'd search for update document, and I'd find the places in this project basically where that is. So these are the places in the code that I want to update. That's actually, this file is the one we've already changed. That's a part of the React app, so I'm not going to worry about that. So this is the only place that I need to update. So I'm going to add another case statement here for my send edit command that's coming through from the web view. The first thing I want to do is really just verify what's coming through. So I'm going to do a console log send edit so I can see that that's come through. And then I'm just going to console log the data that's come through. I'll JSON stringify that. So I'm going to stringify the message and display it with 4-space indenting so it's nice and readable. And the convention here seems to be to return after each command. So I'll just continue that convention. Probably not the way I'd normally format a switch statement. Now I'm just going to hit F5 to run this. So Visual Studio Code's all configured here to build the web view, to build the React application using Webpack, and then to build the extension code itself. The extension itself is written in TypeScript, so it needs to be compiled. And then it runs another instance of Visual Studio Code and loads the extension in it. So that's all configured already out of the box with this project. It's not something I have to kind of remember how to do like every time I'm running this. So here's the new instance of Visual Studio Code coming up. I have to do Control-Shift-B and open Kanban board to open it. Oh, it's still using my, I didn't take the test data out. If you can see here, it's still using the test data. But that's okay. I can still test that my send edit command comes back. What I need to do is look at the debug console here. So I'm going to make an edit here, and then I'm going to go and look at that debug console. So you can see my send edit command has come through. But of course we're working with the test data here, so I'm just going to get out of this, and then I'm going to fix that test data. I'll go back to the Visual Studio Code that's got the React application open, and down here I just need to uncomment that to get the real data. So this actually will now use the data that's being passed through from the extension instead of the test data. I'll show you where the test data comes from actually. This is a really cool way of doing testing, right? And it's I don't want this in the final production version, but it's been great for bootstrapping and prototyping this project. You can see this line of code here, where I'm using Node.js require, but I'm just requiring in a local JSON file. So that's right. If you're using the common JS require system, which you get with Node.js, you get to use this if you're using Webpack as well for front-end applications. It's not just TypeScript and JavaScript files that you can require or import. You can import JSON files directly. This is one thing I love about JavaScript actually, is that you can just import data straight into memory. Like, you don't have to load it from a file. There's no calls to load file. There's no calls here to kind of load it through a REST API or anything like that. I've just instantly got some test data in memory. And let's have a quick look at that JSON file. So this is data.json, and it's just this JSON data structure that has an array of lanes, and then it's just got all the details for each of the lanes, including the cards, the tasks that are in each column of the Kanban board. So that's just something I thought was cool. Anyway, so let's get back to the extension. We have to do something with this send edit event. Now, one thing I'm missing, what I want to be able to do here, if we look at the plan actually, I want to parse the update, make the change to the AST. So at the moment, we've only got one type of update. It's going to be updating the name of a lane or the name of a column in the Kanban board. So my parsing is just trivial. Like like I'm just going to hard code it at the moment to make that change for the lane. But later on, I've got to have an if statement or a switch statement here that says, I want to make a change to, the title of a card, or I want to make a change to the position of a card or a lane, something like that. So there's different things that I'll have to do later. At the moment, I'm just going to hard code it to do the one thing, just so we get that ball rolling, we get that off the ground. So I'm going to do the first part of this, which is that there anyway, making the change to the AST. But the problem is that I don't have any AST in memory. Now, I do have... Let's just get rid of that sidebar for the moment, as we get a bit more room here. So here's the on document changed message that we're handling the event from Visual Studio, and this is where we're loading our AST and our board data. Basically what I'm going to do here, this is a bit evil, but and I don't know if this is the right way to do this for an extension. Probably it isn't. I'm gonna just make these global variables so that I can then come back when the changes come back, I can update them. Now later on, I'm going to have to figure out, is there a better place to put these? This is just a global function, right? So I'm just a little bit unsure where the right place to put these variables would be. So what does parse return? It returns a node. So I'm going to declare this at the top of the file. I'll use the let keyword so I can change it. It's a node. Where does node come from? I don't even know. Let's just I'm using bookmarks to jump around here, by the way. Bookmarks are great. It's an extension to Visual Studio Code that you can install. See the little bookmark on the side there? It allows you to quickly mark and jump to lines of code. So it's really good. I'm just going to hit F12 on this parse function. I just want to see where this node thing. I'm going to hit F12 on node. So this is allowing me to kind of navigate around the TypeScript type definition files. So this comes from, who knows? Who knows what this is and where it comes from? Uninst. Uninst, that's a weird name. Okay, I'm not really sure where to import that type from. So I'm just going to keep going with an any for that. Now board data is different. Board data, I know I control the types for board data. So I just want to see, an I board data, that's what that returns. So if I jump back to the top, I'm going to declare a global for board data. It can be a board data or undefined because it won't be set initially. And I'm going to import that automatically using Visual Studio. So this is going to be the currently loaded, or the AST for the currently loaded markdown file. And this is going to be the deserialized board data. Well, let's say, see, serialization and deserialization, those words are so damn confusing. I'm just going to say the converted board data for the currently active markdown file. That's a better way of putting that, isn't it? I believe comments are very important. Comments can explain things that are just totally not obvious. Bear in mind though that I don't really want these to be globals. I will possibly look at that again later. So we've got those saved now. So what I want to do now that I've got them is I need to make a change. Let's find the send. Here we go. I'm gonna bookmark send edit so I can jump back to that easily. Now I just want to have a look at the panel here. How do I get to the panel? Appearance, show panel, Control J. I should remember the hotkey for that. So what I'm looking at here in the message is the payload, the lane ID. The lane ID is actually going to be, I actually kind of need to look at this with, this is the test data. I need to look at this with the proper lane ID. because the lane ID is actually going to tell me where in the AST that I need to make this update. But now that while I'm looking at that data, I'm just going to copy out the values that I need. So message.payload.laneID, and I'll just copy the title out direct, even though this is going to change because it's going to be probably different data depending on what the kind of message is. Copy them out. So what I've got to do here now, update the AST. Now, after I've done that, I'm going to go back to my plan over here. I'm going to serialize the AST to Markdown. Then I'm going to replace the file content for the currently active Markdown file with this new Markdown data. But the first step here is updating the AST. Now, it just so happens that I have a function to do this already that I've TDD'd. I think I did test-driven development for a bunch of functions. Over multiple live streams. This particular function I may have done, in between live streams, and it's in the converter code file here. Edit lane name. So this actually updates in place in the AST the name of the lane. So I'm going to pass in the lane ID. I'm just going to put all this in place, and then I'm going to test it to see if it works. There's a low probability that the first integration test is just going to fail in some way. That's just the nature of the game. Sometimes when especially when you've done test-driven development, sometimes things just come together so cleanly, so nicely, that they work the first time. It's it's really hard to achieve that if you're not doing test-driven development. So what am I passing in here? I've got to import this. So I'm just hitting Control Dot here to access the refactoring menu, and I'm gonna add that to my imports. Now I can look at the actual parameters I need to pass. The current parameter I need to pass is the new lane name, so that's the title that we've brought through, and the Markdown AST, which is the global that we just made. So this produces an updated abstract syntax tree for the Markdown file. At this point, I think I'm just going to console log that. I'm just going to console log the Markdown AST to see what that looks like. And I'm going to run this. I'm hitting F5 to run it. Again, it's got to rebuild the React application. I can really improve this pipeline, this workflow, but when you only work on something for approximately 30 minutes, well, actually we're going on 40 minutes at the moment, but I work on this up to an hour a week, so it's hard to find the time to invest in the actual development process, but I really need to do that at some point. So I'm just going to open the Kanban board. We're using real data now instead of test data, so I select the Markdown file. That gets deserialized into the Kanban board. Now, if this works first go, it's not going to work first go because I haven't even finished the code. But anyway, let's just change this. We'll change the title, and then we can have a look at the Debug Console to see what it came up with. I'm just going to put a bunch of exclamation marks there so I can easily see it in the output. I'm hitting Enter. Let's switch back and look at the Debug Console. Cool, we've printed out a Markdown AST. There's a lot of, it's a pretty verbose format. Obviously, it contains all the data really kind of, put into this kind of data structure. Oh, there we go. It seems to have put it, that looks kind of like the right position. But let's hook this up and see it working properly. What have I got to do to get this back? So I'm converting a Markdown abstract syntax tree back to data. I think previously I had code to do this in the React application. So there's a whole bunch of code in here that's no longer being done here, like converting a Markdown file board to a file, converting Markdown or the board data back to Markdown. This code is no longer used in the React part of the application. But I do have some example code just here of how to convert a Markdown AST, back to Markdown data. So that's what I want to do. So I've got my conversion from Markdown AST through my to Markdown processor into the Markdown format. Now I have to put that in the current file. How am I going to do that? So I've already got a global here, I think, latest Markdown editor, and I can update the document. In fact, here's an example of, this is the exact code I need right here that I used in the earlier update document message, which I have to get rid of this later. That's not going to be useful in my new plan. So there's some funky code here for replacing an entire document. Basically what you've got to do is you've got to call the edit function, pass in a function that does the edit, and replace some text, but here it's replacing the full range of the text with the updated Markdown. So let's just make sure you've got that plugged in. Now the way we get the full range is basically by passing into the document object the validate range function, passing in an invalid range. This sounds really weird, but this is a bit of a workaround, I guess, to the fact that you can't actually get the full range of a document through the API, through this document interface. So we've got the full range, and we're editing the active document or the latest Markdown document that we selected. We're replacing the full range of the document with the new version of the Markdown. Oh, wouldn't it be amazing if this worked first go? I just hit F5, so I think I have to hit Shift F5 to stop it and start it again. So I'm starting it again. Drum roll, please, or maybe pray to the demo gods. Here it comes. Is it all going to go horribly wrong for me? That's the question. Quite often it does. But I am going to celebrate if I can edit this the proper way. So I'm just going to select my Markdown file. So what I'm going to edit this one. I'm going to edit in progress, right? If this works, it's going to update this text over here. It's going to update this in progress text over here to something else. And let's actually just say something else, just to be funny. It worked! That actually worked. So, wow, that's the first time I've seen this Kanban board work and be able to edit something through this sort of proper mechanism, where it's not going to lose any data. So if there's any data in this file that does not fit the Kanban format, it's not going to get wiped out by this conversion. That is an amazing turn of events. And I think I might, at that point, I might finish up this stream. That's been a really successful stream. Often these sessions end on some sort of thing that I can't get working, and I have to figure it out. But that's been a good run today. I've got the first part of the editing in. What I'm going to do now between live streams is I'm going to finish. I'm going to put through more of this editing. So hopefully we're just going to come back next week and maybe start to do a bit of refactoring on this, just to get it, the code into a format and a style that I'll be really happy with. And then, we're very close to actually figuring out how to get this extension and have it published on the Visual Studio Code Marketplace. So that's really exciting that anyone then, will be able to install this extension for themselves in Visual Studio Code. Now I've got to have a bit of a think before then about, what else could go wrong with this, how else people might like to use it, and what is the general workflow. So I'm going to do a bit of dog fooding actually, which is where you're coding and you're actually making use of your own product. So pretty soon I'm going to be able to use this to manage my own projects, which is really cool. And that's the whole purpose of this, is that I want to have to-do lists and Kanban boards in each of my open source projects, and just manage it all through Visual Studio, and have all the data stored in the Git repository. So that's it for today. Thanks so much for joining me. I will be back in a week, and we will continue the development of this Kanban board extension for Visual Studio Code. Have a nice day.